This is Miss Huerta. I hope you're hanging in there and staying safe. Today we're going to do a World War II road map. So I suggest you get a blank sheet of paper and copy down this road map. I'm going to explain it as we go through. Bear with me. This is my first time creating a video like this. Yay! So you can use your notebook if you'd like. Doesn't matter what page you're on, or you can just use a blank sheet of paper. So World War II, you have your title, World War II Road Map, and let's go ahead and add the years here. It started in 1939 and it ended in 1945. And so let's back up a little bit and think about the world in the 1920s and 30s. So we already know that in the 1920s, Germany was recovering from World War I. They had to pay lots of money back in reparations, and so their economy was suffering, and the German mark was losing value. So let's write Germany has an economic depression. In the United States, this is actually a pretty prosperous time because they didn't lose a lot during World War I, and they actually started making a lot of money, and they were hitting an economic boom. So in U.S. history, which we'll talk about next year, this is known as the Roaring Twenties, and one characteristic of the Roaring Twenties is wealth and prosperity for a lot of businesses that are growing at the time. However, for lots of different reasons, we'll talk about that next year, in 1929 the stock market crashed. And that led to the Great Depression of the 1930s in the United States. Now, a depression in the United States is going to be felt globally because the United States is now involved in business with other countries. So it's going to start affecting the economies of different countries. So we're talking about the 1930s in the entire world is facing some economic hardship. So because of that, in the 1930s, partly because of that, we see a rise of fascism. So that's a word that I want you to underline. And let's talk about what fascism is. Fascism is a type of government that's characterized by a few different things. Number one, you would call a government fascist if it has a totalitarian dictatorship. So we know that a dictatorship is when one person is in control and uses fear or violence, right, to get people to do what they want. But a totalitarian dictatorship means that every aspect of life is controlled by the dictator. So what you read, what you learn in school, what you're seeing in newspapers, what you're hearing on the radio, everything is controlled by the government. So a severe limit on freedoms. Fascism also includes extreme nationalism, so extreme pride in your government. Patriotism, the feeling that your country is the best. Fascism would also include racism, and it would also include militarism. Right, so this idea that our country is the best, and we're going to build up our military and prove to the rest of the world that we are the best. Okay, so fascism includes those things. Now, there were several countries that had fascist dictators at the time. We already talked about, in Germany, reasons why people might have chosen the Nazi Party as their government, because some of the things that they were proposing sounded good to people who were very desperate. And that's the key here. In desperate times, like the economic depression that we're talking about in the 1930s, in desperate times, people might make decisions based on their fears, and it might be easy for a fascist dictator to rise up in a time like that. So in Italy, they had a fascist dictator who rose up. His name was Benito Mussolini. In Germany, we have the rise of Adolf Hitler. In Russia, we have the rise of Joseph Stalin. which if you remember from last semester, this was after the Russian Revolution, after Lenin died of a stroke. Joseph Stalin took over and became the dictator. In Japan, we have a fascist dictator by the name of Hideki Tojo. And in Spain, someone named Francisco Franco. So we see fascist leaders rising up in lots of different countries, right? So then how does the war start? As we know, when Hitler came to power in Germany, he hated the Treaty of Versailles and wanted to act against it. And so starting in 1933, when Hitler rose to power, we see Hitler doing a few things that went directly against the Treaty of Versailles. One, he began to build up his military. He occupied this territory that was taken from Germany during in the Treaty of Versailles called the Rhineland, which you'll see on a map in a minute. He started taking over other pieces of land. One important piece of land was called the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia. And so when he took over that piece of land, the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, the signers of the Treaty of Versailles, of course, took notice, and they adopted this policy towards Hitler called the policy of appeasement. So they could have said, look, Hitler, you're going against the Treaty of Versailles. They could have taken stronger action. What they chose to do was appease Hitler, and which means that they allowed Hitler to do what he was doing, with some warnings. Basically, hey Hitler, you can take that piece of land, the Sudetenland, but if you take any more, then you're going to have to face some consequences. So, as part of this policy of appeasement, France and Great Britain, who, as we know, were two of the main countries that decided and signed this Treaty of Versailles, France and Great Britain signed something called the Munich Pact with Hitler, with Germany. Let's underline Munich Pact. And according to this pact, they said, okay, Hitler, you've taken the Sudetenland. As long as you promise not to take more land, especially like the rest of Czechoslovakia. Right? So if you promise not to take any more land, then we won't have any problems. And Hitler agreed that he wouldn't take any more land. Do you think he kept his promise? Well, let's see. At the same time, Hitler also signed something called the Non-Aggression Pact with Stalin, right? Which is Russia. So let's underline the Non-Aggression Pact. Oops. So the Non-Aggression Pact said that although Hitler, Germany and Russia had been enemies in the past in World War I, and they still weren't friendly, but they promised that they would not invade each other if anything happened, especially with regards to Poland. Poland sat right between Germany and Russia, and they pretty much agreed, let's both take pieces of Poland so that we don't have to fight over it, and we vow with each other that we will not invade each other. Do you think Hitler kept that promise with Russia? Well, let's see. So the whole war started in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. This is the thing that started the war. Because this went against not only the Treaty of Versailles, but also the Munich Pact that Hitler had signed with Great Britain and France, they decided to invade Germany. They declared war on Germany. And so this is the beginning of the war, and I want to tell you that there are two main sides in this war. you'll remember that in World War I, it was the Central Powers versus the Allied Powers, right? Well, now in World War II, the teams are similar, but slightly different. So on the Axis power side, we have Germany, and then we have the other fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini from Italy, who joins, and another fascist dictator, Hideki Tojo from Japan, who joins. Those are the main three on the Axis power side. And on the Allied power side, we have Great Britain, France, eventually Russia joins that side, and eventually, just like in World War I, later in the war, the United States joins. The United States doesn't join until 1941. Okay, and let's keep in mind that the war is from 1939 to 1945, so they don't join until 1941. So it's the Axis powers versus the Allied powers. Now, we won't get into how the war ends just yet, because now with this overview, understanding what was happening in the world, now we're going to dive into the Holocaust, right, which is happening within Germany during this whole time. The Holocaust began in 1933 when Hitler rose to power, and it lasted through until the end of the war, which was 1945, when Germany was defeated, and those survivors, whoever was left, was liberated by the Allied power. So we talked a little bit already about groups that were targeted during the Holocaust. So we're going to look at which groups were dehumanized, and we're going to look at some readings about dehumanization and figure out, who was Hitler and the Nazi Party, who are they targeting, who are they dehumanizing, how are they dehumanizing these people, and how did people resist. Okay, I hope you understood. Now I'm going to send you some questions to answer, and I'm going to ask you to upload your responses on Schoology. Basically, if you go to Schoology and you click on the assignment that I posted called World War II Road Map, I'll post some questions on the Google Classroom, and then your responses to those questions, I want you to upload to the Schoology assignment under World War II Road Map. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope you're doing well. Talk to you soon.